Okay. So, this is in a section of your book that's broken up into parts, and basically these are just regions of Europe that are broken up into parts. I know we're kind of jumping around with countries, but this will be chapter 10, part 3 in your book, and this is going to cover the Iberian Peninsula, or the countries of Spain and Portugal. At one point, these two countries were probably the two largest global empires in the world. And this was around the 15th and 16th century, when these countries were doing a lot of exploration. They were doing a lot of trading with neighboring countries, and these voyages to the New World, or to now what we know as South America and the Caribbean, were bringing a lot of fortune and riches back to these countries. So they were very powerful at one time. Spain is actually the fourth biggest empire of all time. So, like I said, they were doing a lot of exploration around the 15th and 16th century, and one of the inventions that your book discusses is the caravel, which was just a sturdy ship that they developed technology to make these triangular sails that they could put on these ships, and it allowed them to sail into the wind or sail in any direction they wanted to. So obviously, with the development of these boats, they were able to go on longer explorations, thus discovering the New World, discovering parts of Africa that they had never been before. So this is the Iberian Peninsula. Again, located on the continent of Europe, bordered by France in the north, consists of now what we know as Portugal, which lies on the eastern or the western coast, bordering the Atlantic Ocean, and then Spain, which mostly borders the Mediterranean Sea. As you can see on the map, this whole region is pretty much surrounded by water, so seafood is heavily influenced in their cuisine. The Pyrenees Mountains are located up here in the northeast region. These Pyrenees Mountains kind of created a border between the Iberian Peninsula and France. So this region is kind of, because of that mountain region, is kind of remote from the rest of Europe. In the center of this land is an area known as the Meseta. You can see it right here. The Meseta is a large plateau that is about 2,000 feet higher in elevation than the rest of the country. So if you look at most of the other terrain in this region, like Greece that we just covered, it's very mountainous and rocky in some parts of this country, which, again, as we learned last week, hinders your ability to grow different types of agriculture. So hence, as history shows us, trade impacted a lot of what influenced Spain and Portugal's cuisine to present day. But this mountainous rocky terrain kind of limited what they could produce themselves. You will see some wheat and some rice produced in this region. Those are mainly going to be grown in this northern Meseta region where the climate gets a little bit more rainfall. It's not as rocky. There's some grasslands and lower lying lands in that area as well. Also, Portugal and Spain are going to be known for their wine grapes. Portugal, most famous for its rosé and Madeira. Spain, noted for its sherry. Sherry and Madeira are what's known as fortified wines. So, what is a fortified wine? A fortified wine is going to be a wine that is aged with a distilled spirit. Typically, brandy is going to be added to fortified wines to enhance the flavor. And you'll see a lot of Madeira and sherry used in their cooking. Another big business or large crop that is produced in this region are olives and olive oil. Again, remember from last week we were discussing some of the crops that were grown in Greece, which also has a very rocky and mountainous terrain, where olives and grapes as well. We know that those things are a little bit more resistant to the rocky terrain, and they tend to do well there. Cork trees are also a large business, even though cork is not edible. It is a large part of their industry. Like I said, a large majority of the products used in their cuisine were the result of trade and exploration, like I said, around the 15th and 16th century when they were going on these expeditions. So, the history of Spain and Portugal is very intertwined, just like the geography. You know, you have a lot of different regions with different types of terrain, and the history is just as intertwined. So early on, this region was going to be shaped by the Romans. They arrived around 200 BC. They introduced grapes, wine, garlic, wheat, and olives to the region. When the Roman Empire collapsed, these countries were invaded by Germanic tribes who attacked from Europe. After the Germanic tribes were in reign for a while, you had the invasion of the Moors, who arrived in the 8th century, and these were Islamic invaders from the continent of Africa. They were Muslims, and they ruled this area for about 350 years. The Moors are probably the most influential group as far as groups that ruled, that brought over different types of food products. So they brought many different types of fruits, vegetables, citrus, a ton of different herbs and spices, saffron, which you will see is a heavily used spice in their cooking. It's actually in one of the dishes that we're going to make, paella. But saffron is actually like the piston or the petal of a flower that they still harvest today. But a lot of these crops were introduced by this Islamic group, the Moors. They also introduced cooking methods as well, such as marinating, frying, and combining sweet and savory flavors. The Christians drove out the Moors and defeated them at the Battle of Granada in 1492 and forced the Moors back to Africa. This defeat left a couple in power, Ferdinand and Isabella, in Spain. So during this time, late 14th, early 15th century, Portugal had a lot of different exploration going on. Like I said, they developed that ship called the Caravel, which allowed them to have longer expeditions. You had several different explorers going to different regions of the world, bringing back different goods and items on their voyages. And among those was a guy named Prince Henry the Navigator. His voyages were mainly to Africa. So you see some influence in the cuisine from these voyages to Africa. Another explorer from this time was Magellan, who actually led the first circumnavigation of the world. A guy named Bartholomew Diaz, who was credited with being the first to sail around the tip of Africa, and also an explorer named Vasco da Gama, who you may have heard of in your history classes. And he actually was credited with opening up trade routes to India. So you can see already there with these explorations coming out of Portugal, they had access to trade from Africa and India. And this, over time, definitely helped shape the cuisine of Portugal, but it also introduced new things and new products that they had never used before. So during this same time in Spain, Isabella and Ferdinand were in power, and they were sponsoring voyages of a famous guy you may know, Christopher Columbus. So, like I said, this was around the late 1400s, early 15th century, and as we all know, Columbus was credited with discovering the New World. And in all reality, Christopher Columbus was actually trying to find Asia, but he found the Caribbean first. So, anyhow, Columbus's voyages brought great riches back to Spain, also introduced numerous new food products, and around this time, Spain became very prosperous because of the riches and the things Columbus was discovering on his voyages. Also, this is why you see still to date in parts of South America a lot of Spanish influence. Brazil actually still has a lot of Portuguese influence, and still Portuguese language is spoken in South America, and culture as well. So these voyages by Columbus created a lot of growth in Spain, and like I said, it just enriched the region vastly. So at the end of the 16th century, Spain began to lose a lot of its power in Europe, and they were defeated by England in 1588 when they tried to invade England. And this was a big financial and psychological blow to this region. And Portugal gained independence in 1668. So just to give you a little bit of brief overview of the history, and hopefully that gives you some insight as to why you have some of these ingredients in these foods in a region that isn't necessarily fit to grow these types of food products. So another thing before I move on to food patterns, another thing your book briefly goes over is the Inquisition. And the Inquisition was basically just a period of time when the Moors, or the Muslims that I was discussing earlier, were drove out of Spain. And this was around the same time Ferdinand and Isabella were in power, but Roman Catholicism was imposed on the Spaniards. And basically, around this time, if you were Jewish, Moorish, or any other religion that was non-Catholic, you were required to convert or leave the country. So the penalty for failing to do so was severe torture or displacement. So Spain lost large numbers of creative people during this time, but the Inquisition extended to the Spanish-dominated regions of South America and continued on both continents well into the 18th century, until a time period where between 1936 and 39, where a civil war emerged in the region. So I just wanted to briefly discuss the Inquisition, because that may be included in some of your quiz questions that I open up for you later. Okay, so food patterns. All right, so this climate in Spain and Portugal, they have hot, sunny summers, cold winters. The southern areas near the Mediterranean have a warmer climate. The mountain regions have a cooler climate. Portugal's climate is a little bit milder than Spain's because of the ocean breezes that come in from the west. So you'll see various cooking methods in this region: braising, frying, grilling, and you'll see a lot of similarities between Spain and Portugal in their cooking methods and techniques, but there's many different regions of Spain and Portugal, And depending on the region, they may have their own specific style of cuisine, or even like the region of Valencia is noted for its paella. You may see famous dishes from those specific regions as well. Um, your PowerPoint lists several different regions and what these regions are noted for. So the basis of the history of Spanish food, of course, has to do with its geographical situation. Like we said earlier, it's surrounded by water, so seafood is one of the pillars of the cuisine and the Mediterranean diet. The rest of Spain is kind of a diverse terrain, like I said, made up of mountain ranges, pastures, farm ground, coastline. And so you have a wide array of different climates for different food products. So, like we were discussing earlier with the history, there are many different types of cultures that passed through or settled in Spain, and these cultures have influenced the food over time. The Greeks introduced olive oil, the Romans integrated elements of their cooking, as well as the Jewish. So, but like I was discussing earlier, the Moorish people most impacted the food and the different types of products that were being used in developing this cuisine. Also, like we were discussing earlier, the discovery of the Americas with Christopher Columbus resulted in the addition of a lot of elements into Spanish cuisine. Foods from these new lands were arriving in Spain and integrated themselves into the diet. So among some of those products were tomatoes, vanilla, chocolates, many different types of beans, potatoes, and you still see a lot of these food products used in their cuisine. You can read over these specific regions, and like I said, depending on the region, they could be noted for a specific type of dish, or just even a different style of cooking. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay. All right. So the Spanish eating customs. I'll get to all of this in a second. All right. So normal day's breakfast, or what's known as desayuno, is spelled Desayuno. This typically consists of a cup of coffee. The Spanish are a little bit more adventurous than the Portuguese, so they may have churros in addition to their coffee, or they may have hot chocolate in the morning as well. So if you don't know what a churro is, This is a fluted fried pastry that is dusted with powdered sugar out after it's fried. Um, it's basically just a Spanish style donut. Comida is going to be known as their main meal of the day. This would be what we know as lunch. This is eaten midday between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. This meal period is traditionally a little bit larger than breakfast or dinner, and a typical lunch will have several courses. The first courses will be the lighter part of the meal, usually consisting of some type of salad or soup. The second course could be a fish or meat dish, or what's known as Spanish tortilla. This is not the flatbread that we eat tacos with. Spanish tortilla is actually a omelet, and this is the other dish we are going to make in labs this week. Traditional Spanish tortilla typically only has about 3 to 4 ingredients. So oil, eggs, potatoes, salt. It's debatable whether or not they add onions to it. And it's really all about the technique and how it's prepared that makes it so delectable and delicious. So I have included in your modules, before I get ahead of myself, I've included in your modules under the lessons tab, if you go into Iberian Peninsula, you'll see down here at the bottom, I've included 2 videos, one on Valencia paella and the other on Spanish omelet or tortilla. Watch these videos before y'all come into lab this week, as these will be the 2 dishes that we're going to be creating in labs this week. So familiarize yourself with the techniques, with the method, and use these to prepare for your labs this week. I will have the recipes for both of these when you come into lab this week. So, like we were saying, comida, or the main meal of the day, this is usually eaten midday from 2 to 4. A coursed out meal, and usually includes salad, main course, and dessert. Cena, or dinner, is going to be the final meal of the day. This is usually a light supper. Spanish people eat late, so 9 to 11 is common for a dinner meal. It could consist of something lighter like a salad, a sandwich, or maybe a selection of different tapas. Y'all may remember the term tapas from your Garmager course, and we know that tapas are basically just little small plates that consist of various different types of dishes. It's mainly just how they are served in a succession of many different small plates. So tapas may be the focus of an evening meal. Like I said, they typically eat a late dinner. It's not uncommon for them to not start dinner until 9. or 10 o'clock in the evening. Again, there's your tapas, small snacks or appetizers served in bars as a snack in the late morning and late afternoon or early evening. The Portuguese use more herbs and spices than the Spanish. They use a lot of fresh cilantro. You also see more cream and butter incorporated into Portuguese dishes than you will Spanish. Albeit a lot of the dishes are very similar, Portuguese do use some different ingredients than the Spaniards. There is a strong emphasis on the use of fresh ingredients in this region. Like I was saying with the tortilla, which is a 4-ingredient dish, you see a lot of simple preparations in the dishes that they make, but also have dishes that are a little bit more complex, such as the paella that we're going to make, and they're not afraid to use spices and herbs in any of their cuisine. So some of the foods that this region is known for. The first one that is discussed in your book for Portugal is what's known as bacalhau. Bacalhau is basically a salted and dried fish that they will rehydrate and incorporate into their dishes. One of those dishes that is famous for using the bacalhau is what's known as brandade. It's basically a dish where they take the salted cod and they cook it in milk, and then they blend it with potatoes. I know that sounds kind of interesting. Boiled fish mixed with potatoes, but prepared correctly, it can actually be really flavorful. Also, chorizo, which is a sausage spiced with paprika and chili, is a common used ingredient in Portugal, and a dessert that they are noted for is a flan, which is basically a baked custard with a caramel set in the custard on the top. Some foods that Spain are noted for, obviously paella, which is a traditional rice dish that's flavored with saffron, different vegetables, different meats. This is one of those dishes that is going to vary based on the region of Spain that you're in. The traditional Valencia paella does not have any seafood at all in it. It typically consists of rabbit and chicken. But like I said, depending on the region you're in, you may have paellas that include seafood in them. The one that we are going to make, we are going to include some seafood in. But again, it just really depends on the region that you're in as the variation of paella that you're going to get. Saffron, however, is almost always an included ingredient. This is what gives the rice its orange-yellow color. And if you've never tasted saffron, it has a interesting flavor. It's almost kind of like gives things like a seafood flavor, for lack of better description. But if you haven't made paella yet, you'll get to experience that this week. Another national dish of Spain is cocido. This is basically a stew containing vegetables, any array of meats that is simmered for any number of hours. We've already discussed the tapas, which are the little small plates of food served at bars or at a late dinner. Gazpacho, which is another traditional soup. This is a chilled soup of tomatoes, peppers, onion, cilantro, and sopa de ajo, which is a garlic soup. And this is a specialty in the central part of Spain. Okay, lamb, pork, some beef cheeses are often made, which are often made from sheep's milk, variety of local seafoods, all included in the Spanish diet. You'll see a lot of beans as well, green beans, broad beans, peas, incorporated into the diet as well. So just an idea of some of the products and dishes that are incorporated into the cuisine. Like I said, depending on the region and the area that you're in, the food could be prepared different. The dishes could be prepared differently, and you'll see different ingredients depending on whether you're in Spain or Portugal incorporated into the cuisine. But hopefully that gives you an idea of the food patterns. You've got a brief overview of the history. This PowerPoint is available and always able for you to use at your disposal when you're doing your quizzes. Like I said, please watch these two videos before you come into lab tomorrow. These are the two dishes that we're going to prepare in lab this week. I know y'all did some Spanish dishes in Chef Hunt's class last week. Some of you made paella already. And the way we're going to do this is, if you made paella last week in Chef Hunter's class, you're going to make the Spanish omelet or the tortilla this week. If you made tortilla in Chef Hunter's class last week, you're going to make paella in my class this week. So I will have recipes for y'all tomorrow, as well as your Unit 1 test, whether you come in tomorrow for lab or you come in Wednesday. Please review, again, for your test, Chapter 4, British Isles, Chapter 9, France, Chapter 11, Greece, Turkey, and the Levant. We can go ahead and do a short review for that test so you'll know what to expect on that test. Before I start a review of the Unit 1 test, is there any more questions on Spain and Portugal?